You're listening to Mental Health Unplugged, grabbing the aux. Mental Health Unplugged
is a growing community of young adult and youth leaders in Illinois with an interest in mental health. And this is the podcast, brought to you by NAMI Illinois, the National Alliance of Mental Illness Illinois State Organization. This podcast features conversations with the Mental Health
Unplugged
Work Group, with guests and spotlights on topics that matter to us. This work group focuses on creating and applying innovative strategies that involve three pillars: anti stigma, advocacy, and building a community of support, providing the voice to emphasize the youth and young adult perspective. Disclaimer: we are not psychiatrists, clinicians, and we are not social workers, but we are experts in our own experience with mental health and wellness. We call this living experience. Our expertise are developed from our experiences as individuals, as young people, and our passions. Everyone has mental health. You are not alone, and more than enough. It's time to act and talk about it. Let's do this. Hey, yay! Welcome to
Mental Health Unplugged.
You're listening to NAMI Illinois' podcast, Grabbing the Aux, the youth and young adult Illinoisan and mental health and wellness podcast. All opinions of the panelists do not reflect NAMI Illinois. And this is recorded over a virtual platform. My name is Techly D, and I work on stuff like this podcast. Social media is a big old topic and very challenging to tackle, but not as difficult to talk about when you're surfing the web or doom scrolling short videos on your platform of choice. Over the past decade, there have been a significant and notable change in online platforms, the use of social media, apps, how many there are. It's estimated that in 2023, 4,950 billion users actively use social media. According to the Surgeon General's Youth Mental Health Advisory that was shared in 2021, quote, 1 in 3 high school students and half of female students reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in 2019, an overall increase of 40% from 2009, unquote. So a lot of us use social media, but is this a good thing or a bad thing? What do we think about social media? The studies and, quite frankly, stereotypes seem to be that a lot of us, youth and young adults, are on or use some sort of social media platform. But I want to hear from you and have you meet our guests for the episode and ask them, when you hear the term social media, what comes to your mind first?
Hey everyone, my name is Annie Camps. I am a local title holder in the Miss America organization, and my community service initiative focuses on civic engagement and lowering barriers of access to community programs. So I participate in organizations like NAMI Illinois, on podcasts like this, so that I can share my journey with mental health. Immediately when I think of social media, I think of Instagram. That is the number one platform that I use for Miss America, as well as personal use, and many of the jobs that I use have Instagram accounts. So it is my number one form of social media. However, I've been getting back into Pinterest lately because I've been planning some fun things. And I don't know if we would consider that social media. We can chat about it later, but I am a fan of a Pinterest board.
Hi, I'm Ariel J. I am very passionate about mental health, so I do things like this. I volunteered with NAMI, and what first comes to mind when I think of social media is probably Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram.
It sounds like there's an assortment of social media platforms that we all use. And Annie brought up Pinterest, interestingly enough, which I understand people do use it socially. Because I consider any platform that is online and used to connect people to each other to be social media. But social media is defined as websites and applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking, according to the Webster Dictionary. I want to first open the floor up and ask everyone, how do we use social media?
I kind of talked about this a little bit in my explanation, but I try to separate my social media usage. So I do have a personal Instagram account, but I really don't post on it much, since every day I'm posting on my official _Annie Camps account. That's more of kind of like a job. I go on, I post, I know what algorithm I'm following, I know the layout I'm following. And then, for example, Pinterest, if we're just going on that as a social media, I argue that it is because, for example, I send my partner like pictures of houses and links to different recipes. And so we use it kind of as a form of communication. Like, this is what we would like in a future home of ours, or this is a fun, idea that we can do when we're home. And so that's more of a fun social media program for me because I don't use it for anything other than social. Whereas TikTok is also kind of split where I do make TikToks, but primarily I just kind of doom scroll on there.
I will say that I primarily use it to consume and react to content rather than make content. I just really don't like, especially if I do this personally, I don't create any social media content for personal reasons. It's just not something that I've ever really been into. For work, I use it sometimes, but I'm not the one posting. Like I'll make a design for a post and then someone else who's in charge of social media will then like approve it and post it. And that's the whole thing. So yeah, I primarily use it for personal purposes, I'd say.
Ariel J, you brought up a very interesting thing about consuming versus creating on social media. And Annie, you also mentioned how you use social media as kind of less for personal use, like you have a personal Instagram, but you more use it more for I have it written as personal versus company. But what are your thoughts on creation versus consuming on social media?
That's a good question. I create things for other people to consume, and then I'm scrolling and I'm like, oh, that's really good. And they were thinking the same thing when they made it. They're like, oh, someone's gonna really like this. And then I'm thinking the same thing when I have videos that I've already created that I'm gonna release in like 3 or 4 months from now. I'm like, oh, when they get a look at this, they're gonna love it. I use Canva Pro and Chat GPT a lot, not to share my secrets.
Would you consider Canva to be a social media because you can work with your teammates? Or do you think that there's a difference between consuming things and creating things?
I have a very hard line. So, like, I don't consider Microsoft Teams as social media because you do it only for work. So, therefore, like, I'm not creating Teams messages to share for people who have a Teams account just because, right? Everyone is on there because they work with you or you have some sort of connection, and it's that type of conversation. Where on TikTok, you can just make a TikTok if you'd like, where you can work on TikTok, but you don't necessarily have to. Whereas if I just made a Teams account and no one's on it, I'm not talking to anyone. There's no like Teams group that you can get on, like that weird Meta AI like meeting room that you could join in online and like hang out with people. So I don't know if I would consider it a social media because I don't know if the primary reason it was created and used is for social purposes, more for simply work.
That's a good point. The reason why I asked is because we commonly see, Facebook and Instagram being talked about all the time and being used to promote mental health work. Yet there's a lot of other platforms that people use to kind of either spread messages or continue conversations where the purpose of socializing kind of happens. But I don't think that really explains why we are social media users. Because for myself, I have not analyzed why I'm on social media because I feel like I've been on it for so long, it's just a part of my life now.
That does feel weird because I feel like I grew up in a bit of a weird time where, yeah, social media definitely existed when I was a kid, but I don't really feel like people really started using it a lot until I want to say I was probably in middle school or high school when things like Snapchat and Instagram really started to blow up. And I feel like it just kind of grew exponentially from there. So it's weird to think like, yeah, I've lived without social media till I was a teenager, but it's really hard for me to imagine what life is like without that now.
I appreciate you sharing that because I too started using social media more often when I was in middle school and kind of introduced to, online platforms. And being as young as I was, I think that interactions influenced a lot of how I socialize and kind of the language that we use online, as well as just finding information when it comes to it. Do you think that because we utilize social media when we're younger, there's a impact on our overall wellness as we grow up and develop as individuals?
I always take this with a grain of salt because I grew up in an odd family where we had a desktop computer, but we were very low incomes. Like we didn't have internet. We lived on a farm. And so I never had a MySpace page like my friends did, but I never got into that. And when I got into Instagram, honestly, I think my first post was when I was probably in like seventh grade, maybe sixth grade, seventh grade. So a little bit later than some of the kiddos are doing now. And I always answer it with a grain of salt because I think that we certainly have different challenges, whether that be more visible to the outside world, making it seem like you have to do or achieve more FOMO based on what you see others in your life are achieving on social media. Those are things that our parents didn't have to deal with when they were growing up, and we also didn't have to deal with very much because, again, it was still like really crappy photos of a sunset and like you holding some fries. It wasn't really anything other than that. However, before social media, there was a really large rise of like in-person physical bullying and attacking of students. So yes, it is different. And we using social media for years, of course, that has affected how we've grown up, but I do think that as we instill some new problem for our youth and generation, it kind of replaces a different problem, and they start to kind of mold into new things as technology comes, where I'm sure that AI will be a really big issue for kids in 20 years, and that might replace then social media and how we're using that.
But if I see art that's generated by I get very disappointed.
Based off the current climate of social media, how do you guys feel about its influence and impact on our wellness?
I personally think I use it for wellness options. So like I use it to de-stress. I'll watch funny videos. I look up like different workouts and stretches and things. And even when I'm just not feeling the best too, I'll look and be like ways to combat bloating and like watch videos on that. And so of course there are, negative ways that you can use it, but if you're using it mindfully and understanding, okay, I'm home from work, this is my de-stress time, I'm going to play Heyday and message my friends on Facebook Messenger, that can do a lot for your mental health.
That's an interesting point you bring up about like using it to de-stress, but then also just to go back on what you said about using it for self-help. I think that's really cool because if you do your due diligence in making sure that everything you read is reputable online, then I feel like you can get a lot out of it. I have a bit of background in like psychology, neuroscience, and the first thing that I think is about, I guess, the impacts that it can have on your brain neurologically. I would imagine that if your work revolves around social media, that's probably going to be really difficult for you to both separate work and personal time, and harder for you to be able to sleep. And then we all know that sleep is really important for contributing to your mental health.
I do resonate with that because when it comes to anything that has to do with pageants, when I'm posting on Instagram, it is like, oh, let me create this content for other people to see. But I'm also like, oh, this is like really cool content. Like I'm very proud of what I'm creating and I like this and I like the videos I'm sharing with people. But I also am not very invested in like my followers' opinions of it yet because I have a small following. I'm not sure what would happen if I had a large following and social media was where I made my actual income. Of course, I have another job, but for now, it is still something that I do genuinely enjoy. So it's not that bad. I think that if I didn't like it, it would be a lot different and my post would probably be very crappy.
Ariel J, I appreciate you bringing up the neurological aspect of that and your background in psychology. And Annie, I appreciate you sharing about the opinions of others because that's something I did want to bring up. I'd like if you could share a little bit more about, I guess, how the opinions of others doesn't matter to you, but I don't know how to phrase that in a question yet.
I think I kind of get where you're going from. The opinion of others doesn't really matter to me, yet I create content for others and I'm like, oh, they're really gonna like that. But I also don't care if you like it. If I like it, that's all that matters. Um, Well, number one, it comes from a point of I have 1,600 followers, and so that's not very many. And so I don't really get a lot of comments. I don't really get any hate comments. Honestly, I feel like I would just delete it. And it's one of the things where I'm like, I'm sure that people may be messaging or like sharing my stuff, but I don't ever see it. So it's kind of like the out of sight, out of mind thing. And if I'm looking at my social media and I really like this content and I like this video, I want to post it, and I'm assuming that other people will like it as well. One example is my YouTube channel. So I would post all of my mock interviews for prep. I would post like actual pageant interviews, which is unheard of for you to just post your 10-minute interview for people to watch. And that's really a vulnerable thing. But I shared it, number one, because I had no followers. And I was like, who's actually going to see this? No one actually cares. And because I like it, now I can go back, and when people are like, oh, you do pageants, I can pull up my YouTube page and just say, yeah, you can watch some of these things. You can learn a lot about me from this 10-minute pageant interview I have up here. And so I made vlogs during my Miss Illinois week, vlogs when I went to Miss America, not because I wanted other people to follow and watch. I think I have maybe like 25 views on YouTube. It's because my grandma can watch that. My dad can watch that. I can watch that a year from now when I'm sad and I'm like, oh, I want to know what it was like to be there and to relive it. Other people who want to be there can watch it and imagine being there next year, or they don't. I don't really care. That's the nice thing about it, is because I like it, I'll post it. If you don't watch it, that's cool.
I do want to add something to that because something just happened a few days ago that made me think about that. I was on YouTube, and sometimes, for school, like you'll have to film a video and post it. So I went back to a video of an old class that was like, it was like very performance based. So all of the classes would be filmed and put on YouTube. And we'd get sent the link, right? I realized I had one of the videos from that class in one of my YouTube playlists, and I went back and watched it. And I got really sentimental, and I was really happy to find that. I don't know why, but it made me really happy to see that because it reminded me of so many positive things that I had forgotten that were going on at that time.
I think that's a really special sentiment because like I relate to that a lot. And we were starting of the generation of photos of your kids and videos of your families. And so I had a short realization that, oh, shoot, if I become Miss Illinois, Miss America asks you for hundreds of videos of you and your family and your childhood. I don't have those. That just wasn't something that was happening. And so that's also something. I have a really crappy picture of like my 17th birthday party, and the pictures of my best friend biting into a sandwich. But in the background is my late father and my other dad. And that's the only picture I have of the two of them together. And so I look at that and I wish that I had taken videos, like even just one silly video of us sitting at the table, posted it to social media to share. I could watch that over and over again. And I try not to make it, be an attack on myself, like, why didn't you this? Why didn't you that? Because of course we don't know. And it's in retrospect. But if I had set up my phone to live stream playing video games with Cliff before he had passed, how many times I would have watched that over again just for me. So yeah, documenting your whole life on social media has its downfalls, but also, I mean, imagine being able to look back.
I really like that you both brought up the emotional aspect that documenting your life can have and then being able to share it with others. For a similar reason, I also use social media to just kind of share whatever I want, whatever makes me happy. But also in that same sense of like, I enjoy this, and maybe you would enjoy this too if you saw it. I believe something that I have heard very frequently is people taking their phones and we're live streaming or we're taking a picture to post on social media, and there's a huge stigma about using social media to capture those moments. And you have all these quotes that get shared about put your phones down and enjoy the moment versus us enjoying the moment and also capturing it so we can look back on it. How do you guys feel about the stigma of using social media as young adults?
I absolutely resonate with what you said to like live in the moment and be there and be present. But, those are the moments. And so I think that it's completely valid in wanting to document that and being able to live in those moments over and over again.
When I'm participating in events, I have a lot of trouble remembering to take pictures of things. Like if I'm at a party or something, I probably will be the worst at taking pictures. I end up regretting that until I find out someone else took a picture and or they took a video. Usually it's someone else who does that, and then I get to look back on that and relive those moments.
Maybe the reason why we use social media is based in our emotions and wanting to feel connected. And it's interesting because in New York, there was a bill that was being discussed about children using social media. And something that you mentioned, Ariel J, was the neurological components in that statistics that they were quoting. They even say that part of the reason why they wanted to have this regulation on social media platforms was because it was a form of disruption for children's sleep because of nighttime use of social media. We all used social media when we were very young, and we've kind of watched it grow in a digital age that's changed a lot over time, but we still feel like connected to it in some way, and there's an emotional aspect to that. And there's a lot of conversations about whether or not social media is the cause of our emotional states, or if it's like affecting our wellness, or if it's prolonging these feelings that we're having, whether it's anxiety or depression. But it also sounds like, on the other hand, we're using social media to feel connected, find the resources that we're looking for, as well as get to talk with people and connect with people and find resources for our mental health. It sounds like we have a lot more awareness and consciousness when it comes to how we utilize social media.
I think that's because we've been inundated so much as we've been raised. Like, oh, this is scary. This is dangerous. Be careful.
Like I remember growing up and hearing about a bunch of things on TV about, oh, be careful on social media, which the message was definitely needed, but some of the things stuck with me because they were really terrifying. So I definitely grew up with the notion that A, using social media requires great responsibility, and B, that it can be very dangerous, which I do feel like it's really important to emphasize the responsibility part of it, because if you're not being responsible, you can end up in a dangerous situation. But if you do use it responsibly, then you can get a lot out of it.
I agree with that. Thank you for bringing up responsibility and accountability, for that matter, when it comes to utilizing social media and how we interact with others. Because, there's a lot of trolling on the internet, and there's those darker sides. So I think accountability is another important part of our relationship with social media.
I guess another thing to add is that while I do, like, sometimes I do feel like it's really hard to escape social media, but if you're not really super active with it, if you're not following stuff on Twitter, for example, you're probably still going to find out about it because people are still going to talk about it. It's always going to be there.
Bring up a really good point of how the things that are talked about are going to be discussed regardless of whether they're on an online platform or in person. How do we feel about social media and its influence on mental illness and mental health conditions? Because there's a lot of information out there and a lot of stories that people share about themselves or others.
I personally think it's a positive. All of the information resources that we have out, especially like the NAMI pages and the different mental health and depression, borderline personality pages. I actually work with an organization. It works with borderline personality disorder and really focuses on destigmatizing that. And so being able to connect with those people over social media and learn about that and find resources and trainings, that's all been immaculately valuable. And I'm sure that there's cases, of people spreading misinformation and all of that when it comes to mental health and wellness, and especially with diagnoses online. But I find it overwhelmingly helpful of even just being able to join a group of borderline personality disorder people who are dealing with it or have someone who they have in their family who has it, and just be able to chat about that and find a common community. Because, in this day and age, I'm not just kind of like walking through Jewel looking at people being like, do you know anyone with borderline personality disorder? And do you want to talk about it? But, I think any education and lowering the barriers of access, which would be free social media, is a positive.
I mean, it's not even just about information. It can also be a crucial lifeline. If you think about things like 988, the Trevor Project, hotlines like that, I know I originally found out about a lot of those things through social media. And like having access to that information is super valuable. And like you said, Annie, about finding content about different mental illnesses, for example, like, anxiety or depression. I think that if you see a meme about that and, it can help put words to things that you're feeling when you don't really have the words for them. It can help you find community, and it can help you better advocate for yourself. I mean, sometimes I find myself, if I see a meme that relates to my experience, I will share it with people close to me. Like, this is how I feel when, and like, you get a laugh out of it, but they also get to know you a little better. And I think that's really cool.
I appreciate you sharing that, Ariel J. Yeah, you're right. Sharing memes is a way of communicating with people or relating to others. So, the question on the table really should be, which is the episode title, does social media depression? Because it feels like so many of, whether they're parents or adults, a lot of people just discuss social media as being the cause of mental illness.
Social media does depression, just like how life depressions and family depressions and work depressions. But again, realizing that everything is ebb and flow and there are positives and negatives to everything. And so, yeah, personal testimonies of how social media can hurt mental health, but then also the many ways that you can use it to lift you out of those things that are caused from other things, from family life and work and all of that.
I would agree with that. I will add though that I think I probably say yes and no, like just because of how complex it is. And there are psychological and physical aspects to, I guess, both answers to that question. I don't know. I don't really want to just say one thing and have to, stick to that one response, I guess.
I understand that. I remember when we originally proposed this idea, does social media have a huge influence on our mental health, since it doesn't feel justified to only say yes or no? And in some cases, it's even dangerous to dismiss its influence as a whole. Do you guys have any tips on using social media when it comes to our mental health? I know we mentioned using social media with intention.
Part of that for me is like a lot of sites will give you options to filter what content you look at. And I am very intentional about filtering the types of things I see.
I always suggest following accounts that make you feel good and going out of your way to add those accounts, because you're doom scrolling, of course. And so making sure that, every three that you see is something fun and positive from something you like. And so following those, because if you only follow accounts of people you want to be or jobs you want, then you'll always be wanting for something rather than, following a cute dog account or like an account for a sport that you like or a hobby that you like.
Like following NAMI accounts, like at NAMI Communicate, at NAMI Illinois, or your local affiliate, including this wonderful podcast that we've created here. Following with intention of things that you want to engage with rather than what society tells you to engage with. We had a very interesting conversation of social media and wellness, and we hope that this episode provides some insight and value about our experience using social media and the influence that we believe it has on our mental health and the responsibility of using it. Can we think of 3 things from this episode that we found really important that we mentioned?
I think that especially if you're someone who works on social media, being very cognizant of taking time to either step away for your mental health or using it very constructively to make your mental health better, especially if it's a platform that you use every day, all day, and you used to find joy in, maybe try and find joy in it again.
I guess the second thing is it's not all bad or all good.
I think my takeaway would be using social media with intention. Well, don't forget that you too can join our NAMI Illinois Young Adult Work Group if you are between the ages of 17 and 27 years old and interested in becoming an advocate for youth and young adults in our state. You can visit namiillinois.org and find our tab space. And we have opportunities to speak, present, and get in on this podcast. Below, in the description, you can find links to the research done by others on social media, the NAMI blog about social media practices, and more about NAMI Illinois. So thanks for joining. Thank you for listening
To Mental Health Unplugged, Grabbing the Ox.
a NAMI Illinois podcast. Special thank you to our panelists and the National Alliance on Mental Illness Illinois State Organization for their support to emphasize youth and young adult voices. To find out more about the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in Illinois, visit namiillinois.org. That's NAMIILLINOIS.org. If you or someone you know is in a crisis, call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 in the United States. For imminent danger, call 911 and request a crisis intervention trained officer.